Hello everyone, and welcome back to Inside ArtScroll, where the books you read and the people who write them come to life. Today I am joined by Rabbi Tzvi Uhr, a close Talmid of Rav Elya Meir Sorotzkin, and we're going to be talking today about the brand new biography of Rav Elya Meir Sorotzkin, written by Avram Birnbaum. I know there's a lot of excitement around the Olam HaTorah about this book, and you actually, before this interview, when we were schmoozing, you shared a very interesting thing to me, which I think is symbolic of what Rav Elya Meir stood for, and that is that the Bachrim in Springfield Yeshiva, now located in Plainfield, were very excited about the biography. And you told me something interesting from the present Rosh Reb Baruch.
Yeah, everyone ordered the books.
Everyone ordered the books. But he said, we're not looking at the book till...
The shipment came, and everyone was very excited. And the yeshiva said right away, it's going to be a shter to the hasmod of the yeshiva, to the storm of the yeshiva, not till all Shabbos. And
so not till this coming Shabbos is an off Shabbos?
Tomorrow, yeah. They're sitting in boxes right now.
The books are in the boxes.
To look at it, and yeah.
But I really think, don't you agree that that's kind of the message and the lesson that Rav Elya Meir himself personified?
Absolutely. Everything was around the cheshbon of Torah.
Everything works around Torah. Yeah. And if something is going to shter, something is going to disturb, and somehow take the attention away, then...
No matter how exciting it was.
And here's a book about their own rosh yeshiva.
Yeah.
And the book is highly anticipated, and it for good reason. Rabbi Tzvi Sorotzkin, Rav Elya Meir's brother, looked at the book, and he saw how beautiful it looked. I saw a video of this.
Yeah.
And he's reading the flap, and then he made a comment. He said, and mistam, probably the inside of the book is even more beautiful.
I hope so. I'm sure it is.
Which it is a beautiful, beautiful book with amazing stories talking about his hasmada and his love of talmidim and his impact, which we'll get into. But tell our viewers how your background and how you first got to know the rosh yeshiva.
So I was in Mesivta Pseik by Meir Reuben 18 years ago. A good friend of mine had gone to Springfield, and he called me the first All Shabbos. His first man, he said to me, this yeshiva is cut for you. This is yeshiva for you, you got to come here. The next All Shabbos, by the end of summer's man, I was sold. I came from my Feher Elzman, and I never left, basically. Mm-hmm. He asked me on the Feher.
That was for what grade was that?
I was first year. I was joining first year. I was joining first year Elzman. I took my Feher. Regular Feher, he asked me learning. Gave me Mashikol Torah. He asked me Mashikol Torah. Then he asked me 3 questions, which I thought were just for me, but I realized this is for everyone. He asked me about my davening, about my learning, and about my she'ifas, my dreams. And while I thought he was trying to test me out, see if I would fit with the yeshiva, I realized afterwards this was his marching orders for what the yeshiva was all about. What Springfield is all about, what the Springfield Bacher was all about, and his vision of what a Ben Torah was all about.
When he asked you about your tefillah, what specifically did he ask you?
His nusach was, are you a Bacher that comes to davening talmidim kesidrim u'safim kilchasim? That was his lashon. And I quickly learned in the yeshiva that these 3 things were the focal of the yeshiva, and he led it by example. Mm-hmm. His davening was unbelievable. He would come to daven every single day, the avodah, the karbonis, the psukkah de zimra, the birchas kriyishma, the avarabba, I'm sure a lot of people know about, but it wasn't just like a production. It was every
the book
single...
talks about it.
Yeah.
The havarabba was something to see.
It was every day. Every day it was heart-wrenching, every single day. And his davening was with such a bren. He would come every day, sit down by his siddur, and pull out these little papers from his pocket. They had names on them. And he would always be beside of the papers, the names, talmidim, and different yidden that fell into his heart, that he was davening for, worrying about, thinking about, and constantly, always, all throughout the years when I was a Talmid and when I came back to be a rebbi in the yeshiva. I'd always see him with his papers, always davening for people, and a big dog was just put on his davening. General davening, and then he taught us about the connection between davening and learning, and that the Torah comes from a Nisan HaTorah. And you have to daven to the Nisan HaTorah for Siyata D'Shmaya learning. Besides his Avarabba, he would come into First Seder every day. On his way in, he would stop right by the doors of his medrash and pull out a Gemara. In those days, not all the Gemaras had the Yeratzin printed in them, but he'd find the Yeratzin, he would say the Yeratzin by the door, And then depending on the sugya, he would pull out $1 to $5 from his pocket and put it into the pushka. And we knew, depending on how much he put into the pushka, what's going on, we were holding in the sugya right now. He would come sit down in his seat and open it to Tehillim. That's how he started for Seder. He opened it to Tehillim and he would daven Tehillim for a few minutes. It's the hallmark of a Springfield Bacher now. A few kapitel Tehillim before Seder.
Even today, really?
Yeah, that's the talmidim, yeah. And he would take out his notes and he would start the date on his notes. He would write a tefillah. He would find some tefillah connected to the parsha every single day, and then throw himself into the sugyas, throw himself into learning. That was every single day. Mincha, Ma'ariv, Ma'ariv was an avodah, a musar, Ma'ariv avodah that was unbelievable. When I came, I quickly realized the yeshivah of it, and I maneuvered my seat to get as close as I can to him, eventually ending up on his table right next to him, and being able to see it and to watch it and to learn from his murdik avodah salev that he did.
When he asked you about your aspirations, what did you tell him?
So the way he set up was, first, what number are you in your shir? Where do you consider yourself? And whatever you said, he'd always say, why aren't you, say, top 10, why aren't you top 5, why aren't you top 3? Mm-hmm. And he pushed us to go to the best we can, to be the biggest mentor you can be. It was, in the beginning, the shmuzin, you hear the shmuzin, and it didn't seem realistic. And he taught us to believe in ourselves, to believe in the unlimited kaychas that a yid has, to be amul b'Torah, to be an Eved Hashem, Yir Shemayim, everything. He pushed us beyond anyone's abilities, beyond anyone's thoughts that you could, and he pushed himself. He had such natural kaychas, kishrin, and everything, and he didn't rely on it. He pushed and pushed himself. It was unbelievable, always.
Yeah, the author talks about the fact that for those who are watching this conversation who may not know, Rav Elya Meir himself was a son of the Telzer yeshiva Rabbi Sorotzkin. He was the son-in-law of the Mirror yeshiva Reb Shmuel Birnbaum. He had tremendous yichus going back dairis, and like you were saying, someone like him could have technically rested on his laurels, or at least his familial reputation and things like that. And when you read even a few chapters of the book, you see that he put such tremendous, almost like a pressure on himself, to constantly steig and not to rely on even his natural God-given abilities, his intellect and his analytical abilities and things of that sort, his stamina. He didn't rely on that. He pushed himself, whatever he had, whatever natural abilities he had, he pushed himself beyond, almost like in a supernatural way.
Yeah, it was unbelievable to see, and he was always zufrieden, but never happy enough with himself. He always wanted more. In his yediyas and his hekif, he was always learning more and always saying, I joined a chabur in Lakewood. I joined a chabur that learned Sechtes from cover to cover over the course of however many zman it took. Before I joined that chabur, I went to ask him, was the right thing, not the right thing? So we discussed all the different aspects of it, and on the way out, he says to me, Rabbi Tzvi, I'm a kanayu. That's how he left me. I'm a kanayu. Now, the yeshiva was unbelievable, and he was non-stop writing talmidim, being maimed talmidim. But every opportunity he saw for godless and Torah and anything, he pushed himself. We were once learning. I learned at the yeshiva Chavuz second Seder, and we were learning, and it was a tkufa where there was a lot of legalities going on in the yeshiva. There was lawyers, a lot of different phone calls going on, and it became almost every day during second Seder there'd be phone calls coming in from different lawyers and different well-meaning people. So, at some point, the yeshiva says to me, "This is a kabbalas al malchus al derech eretz," and the Mishnah says that if somebody's parak al Torah mavir men noisna love al malchus, we have to makabel al Torah. He's all kol kulei Torah. He unplugs the phone from the jack, tells me to go to the kitchen, unplug the phone over there. We'll be makabel al Torah now. We're sitting and learning as if there's nothing going on around him.
Now you shared with me prior, we were talking about your history, and you said that when you came to the yeshiva, you had a certain personal family circumstance, and how the yeshiva dealt with that. Talk about that, because it's a very, very powerful insight into the yeshiva sensitivity.
He was, I'm a yasim, so I came by the Faher. He asked me, I told him my father was nifter, what age, and he tells me that this is something that you can grow from. This is on the Faher. Tells me a story of how Meir Simcha, the Yisum and the stars that Meir Simcha had, and how he grew because of those stars. And then in the yeshiva, he took a murdika extra sensitivity. And at the time, I didn't always realize it, didn't always understand what was going on. What comes to mind was by Yisker. It was a unbelievable thing. Yisker in yeshiva, so everyone goes out. There was the yeshiva, and depending on the tkufa in yeshiva, there were 1 or 2 bachrim there. So it's just 3 of us in the room for about 5 or 7 minutes. He would call each bachar over, call me over, and say the kelmali for me. He would say the avarachman for me. I said it myself, and then he would say it for me. And the hergish was, there's nothing he can say. There's nothing he can really, but he can be with me in this right now. He could say the avarachman for me. And I remember there was a guest in the yeshiva a couple of years ago there. So he called him over also. Once he was doing it for the bachrim, he would call over everyone. And he told him his father's name, his mother's name, and then he told him one more, and he told him his daughter's name. The Sid had lost a daughter. The minute the Shiva heard it, he burst out crying. In the middle of Yisker, he just burst out crying, being nice ba'ol with the loss of a child. Composed himself, said Avrachim for him. I remember one year, my last man yeshiva, he was sitting shiva, he was in Avelis for his mother. So it was the Shabbos before I had Yortzeit. And I understood that I'm not going to be davening married for the Amid that night because the Shiva was a chiv. I didn't say anything, I was sitting next to him, but in my mind I was thinking about it. And as if he sensed it, he turned to me and said to me, "You're going to be davening married tonight." I didn't say anything to him, but that sensitivity, that he understood what I needed right now. When I had my son, that I was able to name after my father, so I called him, told him I'm making a bris in Lakewood. He said to me, "I'm coming to the bris." I told him, "Shiva, I can't give you son Dekaya. This is my first son. I'm coming anyways." And he came for Kriya Shem, and I understood why he was coming. He understood this was something important to me. This was a name I'm giving for my father, and he wanted to be there for it.
Wow. There's a story in the book also about a Talmid. You're talking about when the Yeshiva's mother was nifter, how a rebbi, a Talmid who was a rebbi out of town, traveled in late at night to be Menachem Avel, and in the middle of the Avelus, Rav Elya Meir turned to the Talmud, keeping track of the time that he's going to have to drive like 3-4 hours home, and said, "Nu, shoin Zeit, it's time for you to go." And this is after the Yeshiva had been on a whirlwind, different places, with Levias in multiple locations, and he had quite a few difficult days. And then the book describes how at 1 o'clock in the morning, this Talmud, who's now a rebbi, is traveling home, gets a phone call. He couldn't believe it. It was Rav Elya Meir. 1 o'clock in the morning, finding out how's the drive going. Are you tired? Are you okay? In the middle of Shiva. So you see how his ability to think of others had really no limits. And I want to suggest, and I would love to hear from you, and I should mention that besides being a close Talmud of Rav Elya Meir, today you're actually the mashgiach of Rav Elya Meir's yeshiva Tveres Baruch of Springfield, Plainfield. And what I wanted to suggest, I wanted to hear your thoughts when you hear about someone like Rav Elya Meir, who was so exalted and so dahaibin, and almost like on a different level, that a person could think, what am I going to learn that I could apply in my own life from someone who is just on a different level. But I think at least even if we can't be the masmid he was, but in the Nesias Oilen, thinking of others, I think every person, when you read this book, so many stories are about that component of his personality, that we could all learn something from that. How to, like we say, tracht wegen jenem, think of someone else's circumstance, even when you're in a difficult, compromising situation.
Always. He had a minhag in yeshiva. No, it didn't do anything. And he put the sink on, he washed his hands. While he was drying his hands, he kept it going for the next person.
Uh-huh.
Always. It was a tiny little sensitivity, a tiny little thing, just thinking about someone else. The next person's going to come, the water, and it became like a minhag in yeshiva. That's what he did. While you dried your hands, you kept the water going. We had learned that from him. Mm-hmm. And he was always thinking about other people, always thinking about talmidim. And
is that something that he spoke about also a lot in shmuzin and in addressing talmidim?
He spoke about it in shmuzin in the sense that open, sensitive heart comes from amelos b'Torah. Uh-huh. And Amilas material is what opens a person's hearts to be sensitive and to notice other people's sorrows and other people's worries, and to everywhere he had people. He always had people that he was thinking about, always, wherever he went, he encountered people and he thought about them and he didn't stop thinking about them. I called him I was in Shidduchim, so 2 days later he called me with an idea, maybe do this, maybe say it like this, maybe look for that. Like he was always carrying his talmidim and everyone that he met. I remember when I was in yeshiva, Shabbos afternoon, no one knew about it, but we knew he would take a walk with his rebbitzin every Shabbos in the summer to go to I don't know if it was like a hospital or it was a rehab center, some kind of center that he would go to visit people that were sick there. This is in Springfield. He found a way to go think about other people, and they would come by the yeshiva when they were leaving, going back home, to say thank you to him. I remember like once his man or twice his man, a family would show up, different obvious injuries, and they would come to say thank you to the yeshiva and to say goodbye. They're leaving.
I remember talking about those visits to the local facility, this medical facility. There were times where Rav Elya Meir would literally get on the floor and play with these children who were handicapped or dealing with whatever limitations they had, and only later on did the parents realize who this person was. They saw the stranger come in and start playing with their children and being mesamech and trying to bring joy, to that atmosphere. And only later on did they find out that's the Springfield Rosh Yeshiva.
Yeah, he felt everyone's sorrow, and he knew what everyone needed. He knew what they felt like, and he really, I once called him, I got a phone call recently in yeshiva, that there was a rehab center nearby, and there was a Maggid Shir, I think a Lubavitcher Maggid Shir that was there, who he had gotten his arms and his legs amputated, and he was in a lot of Yisurim. So they called me, can we get some bachrim to come over to say hello, to maybe sing Chazakim. So I called the yeshiva. I went to visit this single man. I went to visit him once or twice, and I called the yeshiva and described to him what's going on. The minute I described to him what this young man looked like, the yeshiva just started crying on the phone. He was crying and crying to me. I didn't even get to what I was asking him about, and he he was just thinking and trying to envision the tsar that this yid was in, until we discussed the details, what to do, what not to do, what could be done.
The book describes how Rav Elya Meir was really a father to talmidim, not just the rebbi, not just the yeshiva, not just the madrich. Talk about that component of it also. How he really had that. He really cared about his talmidim like his own children.
I was zeichet to see him as a grandfather almost to my children. I had the schus to live next to him for the past couple of years, the last 3-4 years. I bring my children over. He would treat them like he did his own children. I brought my son for an upsharing, put him on his lap, wrapped the towels around him, gave him some candy, the olive bays. He would forbear my children when he passed them by, and he showed such concern over everything. I would call him anything that was going on, no matter when it was. He wanted to talk to me, what's going on, call me up later on to be chazaget, where are we holding in things. He carried every single talmid. And as a mashgiach, he would sometimes call me over and tell me what was going on, but things that needed help. And he would tell me, make that phone call that phone call, always on his mind, everyone. And Baruch Hashem, as yeshiva grew, his talmidim grew. And his heart grew.
Especially during his final illness, his gevura was manifest so magnificently, unbelievable. He was going through Yisurim Nairoim. From what I understand, he did not miss shir during that kufa. Talk about that. You were there.
I was there.
You were there, and you saw it close up.
It was unbelievable. When he had to go out for his, whatever it was, for the chemo, for the medication, for the treatments for the whole day, we'd get a message, shir is going to be right after Ma'ariv that day.
After a whole day of treatment?
After a whole day of treatment, he'd be coming in. Sometimes he wouldn't even come to Ma'ariv. He wouldn't be making it for Ma'ariv. Everyone would be waiting in the shir room. He would come in to give shir. I would stand outside in the cold watching. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. I couldn't believe it. He was standing there knocking in shir. At the last couple of shiurim, he couldn't talk. In order for his voice to be heard, he had to squeeze his vocal cords. And he would give shir squeezing himself to be able to give shir, to be able to be orangutan the shir. He told me that in order to come to davening on time during that kufa, he had to wake up earlier and apply creams and different things to get himself the strength to do it. He would come in sometimes with a walker into davening, but always come into davening, always davening with the kanak. And Shemon Esrei was standing with a bren. It was a site that I think everyone can learn from.
Right.
What it means to be an Eved Hashem, no matter what's going on, no matter where things are going. It almost seemed like there was like, he could put it aside. He could like be Mesiach Das Amit, and physically be Mesiach Das Amit, and sit and learn, and connect with the Ilm of learning.
Wow. I should mention, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Baruch Hashem, after the yeshiva's ptira, the yeshiva continues to flourish. His Mama Al Makim, his son Reb Baruch, took over as Rosh Yeshiva, and from what we hear, the new Rosh Yeshiva, took on the difficult job of stepping into his father's shoes, and from what I hear, the yeshiva is doing beautifully.
Yeah. During the week of Espedim, we had each master would come from everywhere, every night, and they'd all end off with a bracha, b'yeser se'esu, b'yeser oiz, yeshiva's going to be on tzliach, and at the time I didn't know what that meant. How could that be? Yeser se'esu, yeser oiz? Like, is that possible? And it's unbelievable. The yeshiva is bursting everywhere, in the dorms, in Beis Medrash, and the shirams, everywhere, and the aim's harving and learning, and there's a new door now that never even met the yeshiva.
Right.
New ninth graders never met the yeshiva, and they feed off that ruach that he imprinted everywhere.
Right. Far be it from me to analyze why, but I think anyone would say that the yeshiva's Mesiras Nefesh is so saturated into the walls of the yeshiva, it became so much part of the culture of Yeshiva Tveres Baruch that that there's a hemshech, there's a continuation of that now, that even though the yeshiva is not there, but his imprint and his influence is clearly felt, and it's being carried on.
In everything, in the Hasmada and in the Amelis that he stood for.
Right.
His Hasmada was unbelievable. Yeah. I slept in his basement, my first Zman Yeshiva. First Zman you slept in that's how the rooms worked out. We slept in the Yeshiva's basement on Evergreen, on where he lived. I would come up, no matter how early I woke up, he was always sitting in his office already learning. He had a chavrusa from Pseik, would drive in, no matter when it was, he had his chavrusa. The whole first Seder, I was able to learn from second Seder, and I was with the same Yigia and Amelis. And no matter who I tell it to, it's hard to understand and to believe it. He sat with us in Beis Medrash every night till 12:30. Every single night. He was part of the Olam, harving learning till 12:30, and then we would come back to the basement, and he'd be back in his office again. Back in his office again, preparing shir, or upstairs we'd hear him preparing shir. That ruach of Asmada is part of the yeshiva. And the Amelis that he taught us and reminded the world what it's supposed to be about, with such a unbelievable toil that he put into learning, into understanding. This is not the first time he learned these sugyas. And he would pace back and forth, holding his head, sweating, staying by the beam back and forth. It was a sight to watch every single day. And not only every day, but everything he learned. Everything he learned was with the same Amelis and Yegia. I learned with him over the years, Mishnah Brura, Navi, Musar, Halacha, Mishnayos. Everything was with the same Yegias and Amela that he stood for, and that he always wanted to remind the world. That's what Torah stands for.
I was going to say that those who were not Zeicha to learn under Rav Elya Meir, what this book does, it again, beautifully written by Rabbi Avram Birnbaum, it allows them to get a taste of what Rav Elya Meir was about, his asmada, his fatherly love for the talmidim, his nesias oil to other people. This Adam Hashalem, which he was, is really described so beautifully in the book. It's a treat that now those who haven't learned in Yeshiva Tveres Baruch could get a taste of that, and those who did interact with Elya Meir could relive those experiences through these stories.
I think it's also an important reset button for our values. Everyone, the whole Olam HaTorah and the whole Klal Yisrael now is somehow interconnected with Keli and Galait. Whether it's in their family, neighbors, friends, we all have raised the chashivas of what a young man's all about. And the yeshiva would remind us and would teach us accomplishments. A young man being matzliach was measured by amelos. It didn't have to be measured by svarim, chedushim, siyumim, hundreds on tests. It was about how many hours he invested in his amelos. And that everyone can learn from, because everybody can learn to appreciate the younger light that they have in their lives for the amount of amelis. He had a measuring, like every a Tosfos and a Reb Chaim, he had it measured in how many hours he had put into it. That was his measuring stick. I invested and it was wild, the numbers. I invested 30 hours in this Tosfos. I invested X amount of, that's how he measured things.
The reason why what you're saying is really so resonant is because the barometer, the measuring stick that you're providing from Rav Elya Meir means that everyone could be successful no matter what their acumen is, no matter what kishrin Hashem blessed them with. Every person could be matzliach. You know, if you go by the other type of barometer of results, so to speak, results-oriented success, so then some people may not have that ability because they're not as big of a Baal Kishrin, they don't have, those God-given abilities, whatever it is. But Rav Elya Meir allowed, so to speak, every person to experience Hatzlacha because his measuring stick, like you said.
He would love saying over from the Achronim that Yogata v'lei mitzasa al tamin, because what does it mean, lei mitzasa? If you were miyageya, then that's it. That's the mitzvah. That's success. There's nothing past that.
The yigiyah itself.
The yigiyah itself, and he would give such chizuk. He would come. I remember he came Hanukkah to speak to alumni, and he told us that Hashgacha feared, Hashem feared that our door, means that door, was being led by two Gedolei Yisrael, Reb Chaim and Rav Elya, that neither of them had much of a shtaller. It wasn't Rav Elya's shir that made him world famous. Right. And he said, Hashem put that chizuk for this door, that you don't have to have a big rosh yeshiva, you don't have to be giving a shir. You could sit in your little winkel in Yerushalayim, in Bnei Brak, and the whole world could revolve around your fingers. And it was such a chizuk, because it's a world of a rebbi of younger light. Everywhere. Every family in Klal Yisrael is connected to younger light. And to appreciate the younger man just because he's sitting and learning. That's the end result. That's what he's doing. And with that, he's changing the whole world.
Wow. He would have shept a lot of nachas from the Adirei HaTorah revolution, so to speak. Because
he loved it.
He
loved giving chizuk like with younger light.
Yeah.
That he loved it because he knew how important it was. There was thousands of people sitting and all learning the same thing. And he would come and tell you, this is it. There's nothing past this. You're sitting and learning and the same Rajba, and everyone's harving the same Rajba, and this is the mitzvah. This is. There's nothing past this. This is the greatest part of life.
It's life itself.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up our conversation?
He had an unbelievable ayin tova on everyone he met, and every interaction he had. He had a way of bringing out people's milas, recognizing people's milas, and making you see your milas. When my first year there was a PTA in yeshiva, so my first year as a rebbi, he called me over, said to me, I have a chiyuv to have a marocha shleima, he called it, on every single bachur in yeshiva, all of his milas. So you have to know every bachur's milas, and you have to be able to give over to his parents in the full understanding of all their milas. He would tell us when we were going to shidduchim, look for an ayin tova. If you can find an ayin tova, you don't need to look for anything else. And it brought out the best in us, because we knew he believed in us, he cared for us. And at the Levaya, I think, was the final sight of that, how many people were affected. It was a heart-wrenching Levaya, because people felt like he really cared for them. He really saw their best, and he really was a part of us.
Wow. Thank you for sharing your heartfelt reminiscences of the yeshiva, your memories, interactions. We hope that people will go out and get the book for nothing else other than to, like you said, press the reset button, reinvigorate themselves as to what true success is, and the success that Rav Elya Meir himself personified, and all again, we may not be the masmid he was, and the God of Torah he was, and we may not have the amkus he had in learning, but
everywhere in our days we meet people, and if we realize how much we can impact them, with a little bit of caring, with an open heart. He didn't run around the world. He sat in Springfield.
Right.
But there were so many people that he just somehow came into touch with and kept them with him and affected their lives.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. And my bracha to you is that the yeshiva as a devoted Talmid yeshiva should be a melitz yosher for you, for all the talmidim, for all of us, and we should continue to be inspired by his example.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.